Good evening. I'm Elizabeth Dark, Associate Director of Programs for the Kenyon Review. And on behalf of everyone on our staff, I thank you for joining us tonight for a special reading by Tiana Clark. Before we begin, I'd like to share a few things with you to help usher you through your time with us. If you would like to access closed captioning for this event, you may do so by clicking on the CC button at the bottom of your screen. If at any point you experience technical difficulties, please email kenyonreview@kenyon.edu, where a staff member is waiting to assist you. Our chat will remain open for greetings and positive comments from our audience, which I happen to know Tiana is very excited to see. But if you have any questions you would like us to answer during the Q&A portion of the evening following Tiana's reading, please submit those to us using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to submit these at any time, as we will be collecting them throughout the evening. Tiana's reading marks the concluding event in our year-long project called In My Time, A Narrative Space, the KR's contribution to a campus-wide anti-racist initiative launched by Kenyon College President Shonda Cater. Throughout this academic year, we have been eager to provide opportunities for our audience and readership to consider ways literature can support and inform our thinking around the ongoing national struggle for civil rights and the trauma of the pandemic. And we have gathered powerful texts previously published in the KR, including Tiana's poem, The Black Bachelorette, and presented them to the Kenyon College community alongside virtual readings, writing workshops, and community discussions. If you'd like to learn more about this project, please follow the link in your chats. A few people will be joining us on screen after the reading, but right now I will invite KR Associate Sydney Schulman to introduce Tiana. Sydney is a sophomore from Syracuse, New York, and is double majoring in English with a creative writing emphasis and also majoring in women and gender studies. Hi, Sydney. Thanks for doing this introduction.
Of course. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for my mini introduction. I'm very excited for tonight and very excited to introduce Tiana. When I first read a poem of Tiana's titled My Therapist Wants to Know About My Relationship to My Work, this was during my first year at Kenyon, I was immediately captivated. I wasn't sure what it was about her poetry initially, but there was something about her words that just stuck with me. It was beyond resonance, beyond just being stuck in my head. It's the type of work that just strikes you where it needs to and stays there. It's extremely impressive, and I'm not the only one who thinks so. Tiana has won both a Rattle Poetry Prize and a Pushcart Prize, among other recognitions. Clark has also received scholarships and fellowships from the Bread Loaf Writers Conference, the Sewanee Writers Conference, and here at the Kenyon Review. Her writing has been featured or will be featured in many reputable publications and websites, including The New Yorker, Poetry Magazine, The New York Post, VQR, Tin House Online, Kenyon Review, American Poetry Review, New England Review, and Oxford American. Her poem, The A's Have It, written about Trayvon Martin, was adapted into a short film by Savannah Leaf. This is just one testament to the way Tiana masterfully situates her poetry in our current moment and does so with unapologetic emotion. I think it's safe to say that the world is undergoing some reparative work right now, and I'm a firm believer in the healing properties of writing and poetry, as I know many people on this call are. Tiana's work has been the epitome of this for me on many occasions, and as you hear her read tonight, I'm certain you'll all see why, if you haven't already. I can't wait for you all to immerse yourselves in the rich world of her work, and it is my absolute pleasure to welcome Tiana Clark.
Yay, thank you so much, Sydney, for that lovely introduction, and it means so much to me that that poem resonated with you. And thank you all so much for being here. It means so much to me. And thank you so much to Elizabeth Dark and Kenyon Review. I have such an affinity for Kenyon Review. It's one of my dream publications. And I was elated when David Baker accepted my long poem dealing with a super trashy TV show, my long acrostic poem. So thank you so much to David Baker and to the Kenyon Review, and I had such a great time being Carl Phillips' fellow a few years ago at the Writers Workshop, so I hope to make it out to Gambier soon, but I'm so glad to be here virtually. It's raining here in Nashville, but we will persist. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you all so much for showing up. If you know me, you know that I'm a words of affirmation girl, so please blow up the chat as often as you can. In this era of Zoom, we don't get to hear you anymore, so please show some love in the chat. I'm going to start off with the long poem that was published in the Kenyon Review, the first Black Bachelorette. I started writing long poems after the 2016 election, and it was a way for me to take up as much space as possible in a time where I felt really small in the world. And the poem kind of barreled out of me as I was driving to a reading in North Alabama, and I was listening to the Commonplace podcast, and the poem just kind of started happening. I know there's many poets probably in the chat, and I got my voice memos out and I just kind of started recording, but Sharon Knowles just gave me permission to kind of let this piece kind of unfurl out of me. It also happened because I was also listening to another episode with Roger Reeves, who was talking to Rachel Zucker, and he said that he found himself kind of subconsciously, he's an African-American poet, kind of stepping out of the way when a white woman would pass him. And he was wanting to interrogate that impulse if he was doing that on the page. And when he said that, that also kind of struck a chord with me as well. So I wanted to write a poem that, number one, took up as much space as possible, but I wanted to chase a kind of audacity and a type of lyric swagger. I wanted to be crass and audacious. I wanted to kind of confront my pleasures and in a very powerful and palpable way. So with that, the first Black Bachelorette, and thank you all so much for being here. When Brian was kissing Rachel and slid his hand inside her hair, her long, long hair, I wondered if he felt threaded tracks of weave and what he thought when he felt her weave. Was he startled or did he know? But when he reached for her, I felt his fingers on my scalp too. I did through the TV. I swear I was wincing. My white guy doesn't like fake things, but I like my fake hair long and my real hair protected, my glory tucked and hidden, something easy and fast. I'm hoping it will grow too. I wonder who does Rachel's hair on the show, blending her leave out with her natural hair, who slicks her edges down with good grease and a boar brush when the wind blows back her baby hairs. There was an episode once on The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air with the actress Tisha Campbell. The premise, they were on a date and stuck in a basement for hours. She stripped off her weave, fake nails, contacts, and eyelashes. She molted. Will then asked, now what else on your body can I get at the mall? RuPaul says, we're all born naked and the rest is drag. Derek has a list of funny drag names and I want one. I want to be called what I really am and what I pretend to be, which I guess in a way is me, or someone who I think might be beautiful enough to be approached, discovered, someone who doesn't have to pay for movers, someone who walks into a party and doesn't have to be anxious because the privilege of their beauty makes them at rest and people find vacations in their faces. I require something fake, woven and glued, stuck to my body, but not of my body. How does a body even start? Sometimes my eyes feel thick and weird from fresh eyelash extensions. In the beginning, my head hurt from the braided ropes of hair encircling my scalp tight. But you want it tight, she says. You want the cornrows so small that your fake hair looks passable. And hope you take the pain. It takes so damn long to be almost beautiful. I've sat in salon chairs all day with Black women behind me, laboring and taming my mane. I like the pattern crop circles carved into my scalp right before the wefts of somebody else's Brazilian hair are sewn like human icing into mine. Delicious. I want the fire to smell a type of threaten me and back away. I want the fire to know I was already consumed, burned inside my belonging. There is a hankering, a hungry choir that craves money and porn, meaning my thoughts are well lit, staged, and faking it too. Even my soul is pre-oiled, fluffed, bleached, waxed, nubile, licking and staring down the camera to ash. The trick is looking like you like it, like you enjoy getting slammed, which is why I like being groomed, getting yanked, painted, cut, and plucked. I've been on all fours as a woman ripped me from my center, where I split in jeweled halves. I did not yell as I bit my lip, grabbed the corners. I enjoy how people look at me when they think I might be beautiful. I enjoy porn best when I think they might be enjoying themselves too, when there might be real pleasure at stake. But who can say really? Not showing pain gets you paid. It takes a lot of money to look this trashy, Dolly Parton says, and yet Rachel, who scratches your dandruff like tea cake in chapter 11 and their eyes are watching God, who detangles and combs your hair with deep conditioner, who wraps your hair at night. Has Brian seen you in your silk bonnet yet? You know it's real when you're riding on top with your hair wrapped. Lala says she was never ugly, just poor. I want my teeth fixed and chiseled. The veneers are so expensive. I hide my coffee-stained crooked things. Cardi B raps, got a bag and fixed my teeth. Hope you hoes know it ain't cheap. So I try to hide the unevenness in my teeth when I talk, which means sometimes I don't talk when I can see myself. I try to hide the gaps in how sharp my teeth really are, how animal, how lower class, how cash poor my mouth really is. I don't look pretty when I come, my mouth open, my jaw slack and sideways, pulling spit, my deadened eyes fixed on what object in the room, this time a chair, this time a corner half in shadow, this time I just wanted to watch a Black woman on TV fall in love for entertainment, for escape. The best cure for microaggressions is shitty TV, and again, Cardi B. Ahmad says, for us American Blacks, we are post-apocalyptic. The end is not near, but behind us. We are what remains of our 6 million dead. We are what was not hung, dumped, or flung from the zong, splashing and graveless, lest you think the ocean a tombstone. The ocean is not scared or sacred enough, but we out here anyway, trying to save ourselves still sprinkling black pepper behind our feet as we run away. But there is no north now. We find the drinking gourd within our cells, guiding stars within our own blacklit blood, we glow. Maybe it's true then that beauty is a type of survivor's guilt, a sackcloth I suffer and itch and injure from and for, or rather that I'm seen through sin, dirty Hottentot is my body. I was such a terrible Lady Macbeth in high school. Her mania didn't make sense to me until it was activated in me when a man left me in my blood in 20s. There is a type of grief I carry in my hands, some dark, unwipeable thought, some liquid other, like my daddy's DNA, his spots. I'm trying to cover them with this talk of beauty. I'm repenting for something, I don't know what. I wasn't meant to be born, but ain't I a beautiful bastard? And doesn't everybody want to be cleaned by slices of jailed light? Yeah, it's true. I want my eyebrows microbladed for $700. There are specific times when I don't want to be wanted. Number 1, at night. Number 2, when I'm alone. Number 3, at night, when I'm alone walking to my car. Number 4, an empty parking lot. Number 5, a man approaches. Number 6, he sniffs me, knowing that familiar scent of pressure and piss from other men that have marked me too. 7, didn't they touch me because I was beautiful, or did they sense what was easy to poke? I've always wondered what made a slave beautiful enough to be raped. What about the body made it worth it to commit a sin on what they deemed a damned body? Maybe beauty had nothing to do with it. Of course, it's always about power, but maybe there was a type of sheen lacquer on Black bodies baking under sun, or funk from the field, or the house slave dilating from room to room, a physiological scent that niggles perhaps, how close desire is to a type of terror owned and familiar. When I get ready with golden highlighter, is this what I am, what I accentuate for my cheekbone to sparkle and the spectral light of my dead belling inside me? The sparkle of dead slaves is forever in me, still iridescent. Keats wrote, beauty is truth, truth, beauty, that is all. I don't know what that means. I've had some dark inkling about its succinct finality. Even in class, I pretended to know what the poem was about when I would discuss ekphrasis and the Grecian urn to my students, telling them about art responding to art and how to make a static image sing. But even then, I was pretending. I don't want to be dumb. My worst fear, a bunch of students would all point and call me a fraud. I once asked Mark, my professor in grad school, and I would stop feeling like an imposter. He said I would feel this way for the rest of my life, which I think is closer to some type of truth, which is attractive because it provides relief to know everyone might be just as insecure and afraid of others as me, and possibly watching The Bachelorette on Monday nights. Like when I found out on the podcast Commonplace, Sharon Olds loves the show too, I squealed because I wasn't alone anymore. I'm not writing for mastery or legacy. In fact, I might be writing against it, a way of talking back to beauty, back to the spoiled fruit on the altar of my body, to the pressurized gaze on my skin every damn day. I'm hyper aware that I'm hyper visible, says Hope Aloye, 20, from Newham, East London, the only Black biomedical student in her year at Oxford who hasn't been broken by a touch, who hasn't been barbed by a glare. You can't write poems about beauty when the streets are full of racists and rapists and the president is a pussy grabber. I want to peg the canon, so I'm running back and forth between the house of silence and the house of shame, shouting over and over with ink-stained fingers on days when I write with Duende, no one can touch me. Thank you all so much for the love. You know what's kind of embarrassing about this is that actually during the copy edits, they had to correct me on my Cardi B quote. I actually had transcribed her wrong from, was it Rap Genius? Is that the, where you go? So the power of editing. Thank you, Kenyon Review. Yeah. Long live a long poem. Thank you all so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So I started writing bird poems last year in the pandemic. You know, some people started baking. I started writing bird poems. I stare at a cormorant. I stare at a cormorant with its waterlogged wings spread open, drying off on a rock in the middle of a man-made lake after diving for food. And it makes me think about wonder, and it makes me want to pry and stretch my shy arms open to the subtle summer wind slicing through the park, sliding over my skin like a stream of people blowing candles out over my feathery body. And it makes me think about my church when I was a kid, and how I lifted my hands to Jesus, hoping for surrender, but often felt nothing except for the rush of fervent people wanting to be delivered from their aching present pain, and how that ache changed the smell in the room to money, and how I pinched my face and especially my eyes tighter and tighter and reached my hands higher, how I, like the cormorant, stood in the middle of the sanctuary so exposed and open and wanted so much to grasp the electric weather rushing through the drama of it all like a shout in the believer's scratchy throat. I don't go to church anymore. But today I woke up early and meditated. I closed my eyes and focused on a fake seed in my hand and put my hands over my heart to shove the intention inside my chest to blossom. I'm still stumbling through this life hoping for anyone or someone or something to save me. I'm still thinking about the cormorant who disappeared when I was writing this poem. I was just looking down and finishing a line, and then I looked back up. Gone. Read a few poems from my book. Little tabbies, I can't talk about the trees. Nashville. Nashville is hot chicken on sopping white bread with green pickle chips, sour to balance, prismatic flame-colored spice for white people, or rather white people now curate hot chicken for $16 and 2 farm-to-table sides, or maybe they've hungered, fight heat and grease from Black food and milk, but didn't want to drive to Jefferson Street, or don't know about the history of Jefferson Street, or Hell's Half Acre north of downtown, where freed slaves lived on the fringe of Union camps, built their own new country, where its golden age brought the silver streak, a ballroom, bringing Basie, Ellington, and Fitzgerald, first-run movies at the Ritz, and no one had to climb to the balcony. 1968, they built the interstate. I-40 bisected the Black community like a tourniquet of concrete. There were no highway exits. 120 businesses closed. Ambulance siren driving over the house that called 911, diminishing howl in the distance, Black bodies going straight to the morgue. At the downtown library, continuous loop flashes snick videos with Black and white kids training for spit and circular cigarette burns as the video toggles from coaching to counters covered in pillars of salt and pie and soda, magma of the movement. On I-65, there's a 2-tone Confederate statue I flick off daily on my morning commute. Walking down 2nd Avenue past neon honky-tonks playing bro country and cash and herds of squealing pink bachelorette parties, someone yelled nigger lover at my husband. Again, walking down 2nd Avenue, I thought I heard someone yelling at the back of my husband. I turned around to find the voice and saw myself as someone who didn't give a damn. Again, I turned around to find that it was I who lived inside the lovely word made flesh by white mouths masticating mashed sweet potatoes for my mother's mother. Free Love was her name. an ex-slave from Warrior, North Carolina, with 12 children with names like Pansy, Viola, Oscar, Stella, and Toy, my grandmother. There is always a word I'm chasing inside and outside of my body, a word inside another word, scanning the OED for suit-covered roots, 1577, 1584, 1608, tracing my finger along the boomerang shape of the Niger River for my blood, 1856, 1866, 1889, who said it? A hyphen crackles and bites, burns this body to a spray of white wisps. Like when the hot comb with its metal teeth cut close to petroleum jelly, edging the scalp, sizzling, southern babble, smoking the hive of epithets hung fat above bustling crowds like black and white lynching photographs, mute faces, red finger pointing up at my dead, some smiling, some with hats and ties. All business, as one needle-like lady is looking at the camera, as if looking through the camera at me and the way I am looking at my lover now, halcyon and constant. Once my mother-in-law said, "Watch your back." And I knew exactly what she meant. Again, I turned around to find that I am the breath of Apollo panting at the back of Daphne's wild hair, chasing words like arrows inside the knotted meat between my shoulder blades, 4 violent syllables stabbing my skin, enamored with pain. I am kissing all the trees, searching the mob, mumbling to myself, who said it, who said it, who said it? There's a big rainstorm happening, so I don't know if you're hearing rain behind me. We're just gonna pray the internet's gonna sustain. Yeah, I'm really interested in kind of smashing the personal and the political together and kind of weaving that in a poem. And just a little workshop story on that poem. I remember when I took that poem to workshop, everyone was like, I think you need to start at the racial epithet. You need to cut off all this history about Nashville. But luckily it was my dear mentor, Kate Daniels, who said, no, she's like, you need to go and do more research. She's like, you need to go down to the downtown library and you need to go maximum with this poem. And I'm really glad I listened to her. You know, sometimes we go into a workshop wanting to cut, but it's actually expansion and the maximalist mass that's needed. And I'm all for some short poems, obviously, but sometimes I try to fight that instinct within myself as well. That instinct to go big is important. I'm gonna read a poem from my chapbook, Equilibrium. I always like to give a shout out because I'm just so happy that Amy Sherrill, who also did Michelle Obama's portrait, that I got a cover for this as well. So bear witness after the Carrie Mae Weems roaming series. Before I knew how to fill my onyx body with slick measures, dip every curve in my skin with dark sway, I needed a picture. Before me stood a long black dress I called woman. You stand opaque with your back to me, a statue of witness, the door of yes, I can return to the monument of your silhouette to find my longest muscle. We both stare down the ocean to stillness. Oh, Carrie, what are you trying to tell me here? I've been standing by water my whole damn life, trying to get saved. This next one I'm gonna read, I don't often read it. It's an elegy that I wrote for Khalif Browder. Most of us should be aware of that name, but if you don't know, Khalif was in prison when he was 16 years old on Rikers Island for allegedly stealing a backpack. He was never convicted of a crime. And Rikers Island is a maximum security adult prison. He should never have been there in the first place. His trial kept getting pushed back. And to protect him, because he was small and vulnerable, they put him in solitary confinement for over 800 days because he kept on getting beat up in the general population. Activists found out about his story. Jay-Z did a documentary series. And I think there's this impulse sometimes as a Black poet, how do you engage with these traumas? And especially kind of, what happened last summer. And I don't often want to write these poems. I think Toy Derricott has an amazing poem that she wrote last summer that came out about George Floyd that starts like, I'm so tired of writing this poem. I don't want to write this poem. But that poem ends with the image. She's like, but this poem is like stuck in the throat, right? Like sometimes even by not writing it, the psychic negation is that you are writing it. And it actually was a day in Nashville similar to this, where it was just raining, and then the poem just kind of is tapping and bubbling on you so much that you just have to enter it. 800 Days Libation, after not wanting to watch Time, the Khalif Browder story on Spike TV. And if you don't know, he was eventually let out of prison, but shortly after that, he took his own life. It rained inside me. It is raining inside my neck. The rain falls in sheets inside, long sheets inside. All the rain is falling inside, collapsing spit. I don't want to watch another Black man die today, or another story of how he died today, or how he was thrown away, or how he ended up. I don't want to study the rain from inside the house, or overhear wild rain swell and thicken, slap the roof with wet words and Khalif. Who was there when you stopped being, and who was there when you were alone and beyond yourself? How the water around you from the island around you might have sounded like a chorus. Who was there? Who was there? Who was there? And now everyone is watching your life from inside, but I'm afraid to watch them beat you, watch torture throbbing dry and long with ache and blue, black bruising, so I don't. And another Black body is blown out, smoking wick. The lone wisp of a life lingers, swelling burnt and gone. How rain wraps around a tornado is a type of sorrow, because no one knows how to fathom damage inside. Someone's eyes could be the weather just after or before a storm, calm and clear, but still bleaker inside the black parts of the pupils, the holes, the smooth black holes in the eyes. They left you in the hole with no rain. And I am emptying a waterfall, shouting, Khalif, I want you to be undead and not alone, lonely in the ground again. I want so much, how it grieves like a fist of pounding rain on the body, bleeding broke. But what I want doesn't matter. What I want are rare blossoms for the dead, because you're gone and your mother is gone. All because someone said you stole a backpack, meaning your body was made a forgotten altar. Your body made bodiless kept pushing back as your trial kept pushing back and back. And Black matter moves backwards in time, meaning Khalif matters in the past tense, even though the space around your life didn't matter to them or them or them. Like the space that scatters and navigates around the circumference of raindrops is never wet, and the braided distance between you and me is dry and long. Like time is rainless with a tight and loaded lungful, blowing 800 candles out for the 800 days in solitary. Your brain behind bars fades. Your body in confinement, your chest caged alone, your body alone. All I hear is your name falling and beating Khalif. Khalif, 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 Khalif. This is such a poor offering, but I'm pouring it on the ground like good rain. And whatever softens the earth is your name. Whatever might grow from that darkening bright spot is your name, lapping little lakes of creation, turning mud in your name. Whatever might be fed from the liquid raining inside me, whatever might be loosened from the muck and the dark rum pouring from my bottle. And Khalif, your name is drizzling a type of grief upon my mouth like mist. As it rains inside me, it is raining inside my body. The rain falls in sheets inside. All the rain is untangled and not touching. And who touched you with the tenderness falling inside? And Khalif, what is there to say after so much rain? The ground is swollen with your name. So I really love acrostic poetry, and I like modern approaches to it. And it was actually a Hanif Abdulkareem poem where I saw him interacting with the Carly Rae Jepsen poem, but he was also dealing with kind of social viral Black death as well, and kind of colliding this romantic ideal of pop music and this idea of wanting to be a romantic, and then what does it mean to kind of watch Black men die again and again. And so earlier in the workshop today, I was talking about permission giving poets. And so that poem was a permission slip to kind of like, oh, like we're allowed to talk about pop music. Oh, it's on. Like at the same time, I was obsessed with the Bitch Better Have My Money music video. And of course, I had to write about Rihanna, right? And for me, that video was so empowering to see a Black woman be in charge of her own retribution. And I think what's cool about the ekphrastic landscape and so interesting is that it breaches this boundary that Everett Hirsch calls. It's really transgressive in this way. And for me to like interact with that avatar of her inside the container of a poem was a kind of reckoning for me. I too want to be naked, zebra striped, in the almost dried accountant's blood, sticky and sucking a flat blunt inside a Louis Vuitton suitcase brimming with the newest money. This is another way to see myself too. And the way Rihanna nooses a white woman up by her smooth feet, a blue-blooded pendulum swaying as her beautiful tits look more perfect than ever. Why did that image excite me so? No, not the tits, but the simulated lynching. It feels so damn delicious to say, bitch better have my money inside my mouth. I hate it when people talk about Black artists being capitalists. Why can't we thrive in something rich and green too? And let us be loud about it. Let us be loud without consequence. Remember when we were dating, I wanted you to pay for every meal. And yes, the movies taught me that love was someone reaching for the check first. but there is no such thing as a free lunch. Someone has to pay with the fruit from their body. Yeah, I'm spreading my legs for someone else because I'm hungry and always at the end of some kind of altar. Even now, I'm paying for my doctor to reach and scrape inside me to say I don't have cancer. She tells me I need to start thinking about babies because of my age. I think, bitch, I'm not ready. There will always be tithes and offerings. At my church, they called it first fruits. My mother gave me quarters, and as a kid, I waited for the clink at the bottom of the bucket being passed. I believe God heard this too. Somewhere, someone is counting the cash behind a velvet curtain. Once a boy said, "Suck it, bitch," with his heavy dense hand at the back of my head, pushing. Pushing is another way to mean pay me what you owe me. I didn't forget. Yeah, I see the total at the bottom of the receipt. I used to have so much debt. I was forever in the wettest bread. I'm gonna end with a new poem tonight. I know the theme of the program has been kind of processing last year and beyond. And an interesting thing was happening last summer too, is I found myself on these panels or readings where people I felt were kind of like, let's talk about Black pain, Black pain, Black pain. And yes, like we always need to make room for that. But I also think we need to talk about Black joy, Black blessings, Black romance, Black science fiction, Black magical realism. And I'm just trying to reach for more joy in my work, one, for my own survival. And so my second book that I'm working on right now is just, obviously the pain will always be there, the trauma will always be there, but is there a way that we can transcend this pain? I don't know, but I'm trying to reach for it, I guess, in my work. So I just want to end tonight with this poem that reaches for that. And for all of you, I'm just so thankful for all of you for being here. There's so many Zoom things happening, and I just appreciate your gift of attention in this landscape. And I hope to hug you all and kiss you all and clink and drink with you all very soon. Good pain. Ending with an epigraph by Zadie Smith. I'm gonna take a little sippy sip before I get started. Hold on. Good pain. Sometimes the wound is sacred. The damage makes us more whole. Sometimes crying is the commitment to more joy. I've learned survival, like grief, is not linear. A circle has no starting place. Each place is a chance to live the moment you are in. Each place is a moment to see the winter jasmine blooming bright yellow buds during the bleak morning walk around the periphery of the lake, making sure not to step in the Tetris of geese shit, which makes me think of Mary Oliver's poem, especially the honking sound of the geese, which is not altogether beautiful, but a wild call waking me up to a world of my unfelt feelings. Oh, my feelings, like Glick, I have so many too. I used to be afraid to fully feel the violent rush of them throttle me and all their gorgeous power before the divorce, before the panic and stress from first book energy, before I knew how to breathe properly, before I knew how to sit still and melt, before I was diminished by my desires until I learned to name each one with audacity, before when I carried the awkward weight of my sadness like some fucking trophy. Long suffering is not a virtue. I'm done with martyrdom. Suffering is not my name. I claim joy as my birthright by casting the cross off my back. Death is not meant to be carried, but surrendered. It's about trust, and yet young students keep asking me questions about success. I answer, what's the rush? But I remember asking the same questions too. We valorize early achievement, and then what? We are also busy with wanting to become that we forget the becoming. I remember David Baker saying there is no hurry. I finally understand that now, though that understanding happened with distance and privilege. Still, the emphasis is on the process, not the product. The poem starts brewing long before the words slice the page. And when the tornado ripped a scar through Nashville in March 2020, I was sitting in my bathtub at 1:07 a.m. with my dog in my lap, covered with pillows, calling my soon-to-be ex-husband who did not answer. Later, my therapist said, "No one is coming to save you." Ouch, Brenda, that hurt really good. I realized then that I was the one I had been waiting for. I realized I could protect myself from anything that would try to destroy me. And abundance, yes, abundance was the blood-rusted Japanese maple I saw on another walk around the same lake during the pandemic when all I did was walk, move my body forward and more forward when I felt stuck. The tree was already magnificent inside me. The natural world mirrors back your music and metronome. I was done with the lack, the validation inside my chest reverberating. I crave resonance now. The uncertainty is the only certainty we have, which means I have to keep trusting that who I am right now is enough. Whatever I am working on right now is enough. I know you have so many questions. I do too. Sometimes I know how to answer them. Other times I am still living them by living through them a la Rilke, right? I'm still improvising, making it up like Clifton, conjuring bridges across the chasms. I'm still asking better questions of my questions. Let's take a deep breath. We were heading toward all that makes life intolerable, feeling the only thing that makes it worthwhile. That was joy. Thank you.
Tiana, when you said let's take a deep breath, I took a deep breath. What an amazing poem, and I feel so privileged that we got to hear that one tonight. Is that anywhere yet?
No, not yet.
Okay. It was also beautiful to hear all of the references to the other poets in that one.
Yeah, David Baker's here. I said I had surprise for you. David Baker made an appearance in my poem.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you all so much for the love. I so appreciate it. I really, really appreciate it.
I got to hear Tiana use Fraggle Rock as a verb earlier today in a workshop, and that's something I'm taking away from this evening, on top of everything else that we all just heard. We're now going to go into the Q&A portion of the evening, and I just want to remind everyone in the audience that you can submit a question using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And we will mix your questions in with the questions that are going to be asked by the people who have just joined us. And this includes Patricia Thompson, who is a freshman English major at Kenyon and has been crucial in creating the resources for the In My Time project this year. And you heard Sydney earlier, who did the introduction for Tiana. And Molly McCulley Brown is joining us, which means we now have 2 Amy Lowell traveling scholarship people on the screen right now. And Molly is wrapping up her time with us as a fellow here at the Kenyon Review and is one of the newest members of the faculty at Old Dominion. So this is our group, and we are going to be sort of rotating our questions. But I'm going to start, as you all are submitting some, I'm going to start by giving the first question to Patricia.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Tiana. That was so powerful. My heart is still like beating a bit fast. But yeah, my first question, I wanted to ask you, and I think there were a couple lines in a couple different poems you read. I think one in the first Black Bachelorette, and then also the last one when you talked about, I think we forget the becoming, that line. In a previous interview with the Kenyon Review regarding your poem, The First Black Bachelorette, which was published in the November-December 2018 issue, which you read tonight, you said, "I've stopped caring as much about prestige. I am writing to save my own life." And I was wondering if you could expound a bit on this more, and if you still feel this way, and what you see as the purpose of writing and how important it is to disregard critical reception of your work.
Ooh, what a question. That's amazing. Sometimes when people pull lines from one of my past interviews, I'm like, what did I say? But I was like, I still agree with that. Yeah, I think for me, I was at this crucible moment in my MFA program where I was confronting a lot of my fears and failures about what does it mean to be a poet? What does it mean to be a Black woman poet, interacting with the traditional Western canon? And I felt all this pressure and all this brokenness around me. And, you know, we talk about the word imposter syndrome all the time and what that means. And I think there's different pressures like within academia, within that, depending on where you stand in the margins and your relationship to power and hierarchy. And then when I started messing with form, particularly, I was talking about this in the workshop earlier with like, okay, well, let me confront the sonnet, let me confront the sestina, let me get inside these really old, dusty forms. And what I found for myself is that making and breaking forms felt really powerful. You know, that idea from Lord, like you can't dismantle the master's house with the master's tools. However, I kind of disagree with that in the sense that I found that like dismantling the sonnet or dismantling, you know, an old European form felt really powerful to me. And if you actually look at Gwendolyn Brooks's early work, you see her doing this. You know, and I know she has her big turn in 1967, and, you know, we can get into this in the chat, you know, where Amira Baraka kind of confronts her that she's not writing for the people. But actually, if you look at her work before that, I mean, I think she's doing the work within these forms in a way that's really, really inspiring to me as a Black female poet. all that to say, going back to, I'm like, what was your original question? Oh, that line in the first Wealth Bachelorette, like, I could care less about mastery and legacy. In fact, I'm writing against it. And I think during my MFA, I found like, oh, when people were uncomfortable in workshop or when I had issues with certain professors, it gave me the wall I was pushing back against. And for me, I had a really inverse relationship to workshop. When actually I didn't have a poem go well, I was like, oh, I'm on the right path. And I stopped seeking approval from others, and I had to learn to trust and chase my own imagination. And I think that's the maturation for my own journey and what I want for my own students. I try to decenter authority in the classroom because I want them to defend their own choices. And so when I started redefining what legacy is, and it's so interesting, I think when you grow up poor, this idea of the future, legacy, I never really had that. Like when you live paycheck to paycheck, or when you're thinking about sustaining or eating, like I love that line from Terrence Hayes and Lighthead's Guide to the Galaxy, like I'll eat you to live, that's poetry. Like poetry is a means of sustenance, right? Like just a means of survival. It's a very urgent present need. So I think, my mind's just spiraling in different directions, but I think somewhere in there, there's a buffet of answers to your really lovely question. But it's an audacity, right? And it is, I do think one thing I'm getting at in that last poem is that, David Baker saying there is no hurry. It took me a long time. I'm like finally feel like understanding the wave of that. But in the poem, I wanted to implicate myself that came with distance and privilege. I am at a privileged place now in my career to relax, there's a different kind of flow in my hustle. But I remember my first book, I'm going off on so many things. I think this is a good place to stop. Thank you, Patricia.
That's fantastic. We have a question from a Kenyon College student and a KR associate, Michelle Lynn, who had hoped to join us for the workshop this afternoon. She says, I love the pop culture references in your poems. What role does the media you consume play in your poems?
I mean, I think as a poet, you pull from the world around you. Like, so Mary Oliver is going to talk about a grasshopper. I'm going to pull from reality TV and Rihanna, right? Like to me, there's no difference in that instinct. We all have our own obsessions and instincts, right? And sometimes I feel like, often with my students, with myself, I feel like, oh, that's not okay for a poem, or that's not valuable or sacrosanct for a poem or something. I often used to beat myself up because like I wasn't a Wendell Berry. And I didn't approach the pastoral landscape that way, but I grew up in 1-bedroom apartments in a concrete landscape, and you write from the world around you. And I think if anything, it's just giving yourself the permission of what are those intense details in your own life. And so I don't see pop culture as this like highbrow, lowbrow or different thing. It's just, I think when you're a writer, you have your little antennae out into the world. What pings you? What zaps you? And just like anything, it's the same move we have with metaphor, right? Like you're pulling from this other world to have your own world make sense. And so if I'm pulling from pop culture, if I'm pulling from an image of my past, if I'm pulling and hoping the comparison is going to help me translate, right? Like I think all of phrastic poetry is an act of translation. I think all poems really are conversations or translations or letters of, again, like we're all just feeling towards maybe, again, I said another poem, like asking better questions of our questions. So I think I'm going to pull from pop culture because I love pop culture. And I like that I like messing around with this idea of a reverence or what is sacred and not sacred in a poem, and kind of jostling that a little bit. I grew up in church, but I was really on the periphery. Like, I don't know if the college students will understand what this means now, but I would wear like little baby tees and like fake Jinkos and like go-go boots and like lime green short skirts to church. And a lot of parents are like, who is this like kid coming into church? Like, she does not belong here. So I've always felt, especially being mixed too, that I've had these like liminal spaces, like being Black and white, or just like being in the church, but like not really being accepted, or not, being totally straight, and all of these like in the marginalia. So I think when you are in the margins, you pull from these places in that liminal space, and I feel really comfortable there. And so I guess that's why kind of that pop cultural world makes sense to me to put in the highbrow world, and kind of, again, it creates a tension in your work that you can ride.
That was so beautifully put, Tiana, and I'm really, really glad that Michelle brought up the pop culture references, because that's something I love about your poetry as well. Something else I love about your poetry, which you mentioned, is just how rich it is with detail from all sorts of outside things. And I can tell that so many of your poems are so incredibly well researched. And I, along with some other audience members, were wondering, about that research process? How do you embrace the creative and your own emotions, and then also enter into this sort of more factual and research space?
Yeah, well, I wanted to be a historian before I wanted to be a poet. And I had an internship one summer at the Schoenberg Center for Research in Black Culture in Harlem, New York. I was supposed to write this huge paper on the Harlem Renaissance. It's actually where Langston Hughes's body is interred. And so every day I'm walking over Langston Hughes's body, and he had this huge cosmogram in the terrazzo of The Negro Speaks a River. So I'm walking over his poem. And I was freaking out this time of my life because all these poems kept on bubbling up as I'm supposed to be writing. So like as I'm approaching the archive and microfiche, all these poems are coming. And I'm like, poems, go away. I'm supposed to write a paper. Like I need prose to come to the surface. And every day I felt like Langston Hughes was like, hey girl, you're supposed to be a poet. And I was like, hey Langston, you're dead. Shh, like I can't have you talking to me. But again, it's those moments when you think, how I love history. I have this obsession for history. How does this make sense? And you have this like existential crisis as a young person because you have all these interests and you're wondering like, how do all these, you're like, oh, what's a person who loves to have rhetorical arguments and research? I was like, that's a poet, you know? And so I think I did freak out. I actually, whatever train heads out all the way to Coney Island, like I rode it all the way there, had a Nathan's hot dog, and I was like staring at the water, and I really was like, oh crap, I think I'm supposed to be a poet. Oh boy, because I didn't really know what that path was going to be like for me. And I literally just Googled poetry career and I saw these MFA programs pop up and I was like, oh, cool. Like, wait, there's a place that'll teach you to read, write. You could teach poetry for free. That's amazing. Why did no one tell me about this? I'm veering off of your question. All I'll just say is that, again, loving history is one of my impulses. And so I think a lodestar for me would be like Natasha Trethewey, right? Like when I read Native Guard, I was like, oh shit, like this is how you do it, right? And again, pulling on history, same for pulling on pop culture. It's that same metaphorical instinct, right? I think Tony Hogan talks about like your dark hand reaching in a box. Like it's that same instinct to pull, like it's that fishing line hook. And so for me, that's where my mind goes. And so I love researching poems and going to the archive. And it just helps me add that depth and complication to my work, right? It's like sedimentary rock. It's like going deeper and deeper and deeper. I mean, Molly can speak to this with her first collection. And I think when you get obsessed with something, the research, like you just buzz with it and you get enlivened with it. And that's the hard part, though, is how can you make the research sexy and supple? And that's a different conversation. But yeah.
Tiana, it's such a pleasure always to hear you read, and I can't think of a better reading to have gotten to listen in on to close out my time as a fellow at KR. But I'm still thinking about the beautiful things you had to say at the beginning of your reading about the long poem and this kind of maximalism and taking up space, and the long poem as a kind of resistance and an embrace of excess. And I'm thinking about it particularly because I'm teaching a multi-genre class this semester that's focused on the spaces kind of between and across genres. And thinking about hybrid forms. And I happen to know that in addition to being a wonderful poet, you're a wonderful essayist. And so I wonder if you might talk a little bit about the ways that you think about genre in your own work, and maybe the differences of navigating space as a prose writer and a poet, if they exist, and how you work between them, and the role that embrace of excess plays in both.
Oh, thank you, Molly. Well, if anything, I think the genesis of this started with the conversation. I think I remember calling, I think I was at Swanee for the Young Writers Conference. I think I called you because I was starting to be tapped for essays. And I think I was calling you freaking out like, Molly, how do you do this? Because you had written such gorgeous essays at that time. And you were making that the crossover from, the poetry to the prose field. And you said something actually in that conversation that stuck with me and that I've borrowed and adapted so many times. You talked about, you used the word dilation. And that always really stuck with me about that. You were saying that something cool is really happening from the dilation between poetry to essays and back and forth, and what that kind of accordion squeezing and siphoning was doing to your brain, your mind, your imagination. And again, it's the same thing of form, right? Like form does this ricochet where your brain gets to do this really interesting thing. And that also with that, I'll never forget Ann Patchett came to Vanderbilt and she said, you should always reach for something a little bit higher in your work that you think you can do. And so when I was starting to get tapped for essays, I was terrified because again, it was another thing. I was like, oh, if I can't write an essay, does that mean like I'm not a real writer? And I was trying to write essays in the way that I like other writers were doing it. And then I was like, wait, I'm going to actually have all my poetic instincts and I'm going to push them in the essay and just trust myself there. And when I started doing that, the essay started to kind of unspool and unfold for me in a really, really gorgeous way. And then I saw what you were talking about, that dilation thing happening, where, you know, I kind of think of essays as just this longer river with little eddies that you kind of swirl and go back to the main river. And already my poems were getting longer, and everything was pushing me towards like, okay, a poem, longer poems to the essay. Now there's going to be, you know, maybe a books in the future. And it was all just like ushering me into that space. But again, going back to the idea of liminality, right? What is the difference between a poem and an essay or a prose poem? And also, what's your relationship to the truth in a poem? You know, I always talk about the lyric I being this collage of personal and imagined experiences, but when you write nonfiction, you're beholden to the truth in a really different way. Yes, you are still a character in your own work, and yes, there is a little, you know, there's a little, I mean, but the veil is torn, right, in creative nonfiction, and you have fact checkers who will be like, where is your transcript for this conversation that you had with your, you know, with your oldest living member in your family? And I'll never forget when I wrote my essay about Nina Simone, I talked about her staring at this particular flag in Tryon, North Carolina, and I had my poetry instinct, and I was like, it's really massive, and it was like overtaking her. And the fact checker actually went on Google Earth and found the flag, and he was like, it's just a regular flag. But it was like, those moments are really interesting to me of like, oh, that was my poetry mind going a little ham. I need to calm down. But I like those conversations, and that, again, I didn't want to use that word dilation and what that does back and forth, and just pushing myself continually. And, you know, we had this discussion on Twitter the other day. Someone was like, how do you end a poem? And I think Alexander Chi said this. It's like, when you stop, there's no more surprises. And I think that's what I like about moving across genres, that I'm still trying to surprise myself and what form can do, how I can break it, what are different ways. Like I just sort of list essay, like I was like, oh, I've done list poems before, let's try list essay and see what I can do. And I love pushing myself there, you know.
I love that description of work between genres as in pursuit of surprise. And I think you wrote that Nina essay for the Oxford American, and nobody fact checks like the Oxford American. So that's a good, and I think it's an interesting relationship to rigor. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, thanks for that question. So great.
I wanted to go back a bit to Sydney's question about the historical research, and specifically, I've noticed that in your poetry, you often respond to the work of other writers and specific historical figures, such as, I really like your Conversations with Phyllis Wheatley series. And I guess I have a question more about creative process and how those specific kind of conversational poems come about. Like, do you read other writers and then formulate ways to respond, or do you start with ideas you'd like to express and then turn to other writers and historical figures to kind of like shape the framework of your responses? Like, do you come to it with those ideas, or are you mostly like going off of what they're saying, I guess?
So those poems were birthed out of a class that I took at Vanderbilt on literary friendships. But whenever I approach a topic like that, I always I'm always like, where are the Black people at? And so I wanted to go back to the earliest Black women's writing community, and it was these group of letters between Phyllis Wheatley and Obor Tanner. And this article I read by Kathleen Clay Broussard, again, my love of history, in Callaloo, where she talks about these 7 letters, extant letters that we have. There might have been more, but we lost. We only have Phyllis Wheatley's side. We don't have Obor Tanner's side. Are the earliest existence of a Black women's writing community. Because Phyllis is working on her second book. She's basically asking her friend, this is my rough modern paraphrase, she's like, hey girl, you got me when the second book comes out. And she's like, yeah, girl, I do. Like, praise the Lord. So they were very Christian in the letters. And so then as your my poetry brain is being piqued, and I'm like, but we don't have Obor Tanner's side of it. So there's this lacuna, right? Like as historians, you write into those gaps, into this research. As a poet, I'm like, ooh, there's a hole here. What would it mean to like write into that and to have a persona poem in the voice of Obor Tanner? There's really a way for me, thinking about my own literary ancestry or history, to reach back to touch Phyllis Wheatley through the persona of Obor Tanner, right? And into that imagined space. And so I think it's, again, always finding those entry points into the poem. And so I think Robert, I didn't find out until later, Robert Hayden had written, he called them psychograms, and he wrote in the voice of Phyllis Wheatley writing to Obor Tanner, but there had not been the Obor Tanner voice. And so again, when you find those gaps, or when you find those kind of things and writing into those spaces, that was exciting for me. And really the whole series of Phyllis Wheatley is a way to have, a conversation with myself, or the lyric self, right? And so, you know, I'm always piqued by things in history, and there's just so much delicious stuff there when you start digging into all this stuff. And so I think that happened, and that series kind of was birthed out of that.
one of the people in the audience, Prince Bush, has been asking about this, you've been talking about researching and fact checking and whatnot, but then the other part of poetry is embracing the unknown.
Mhm.
So how do you balance those two things?
Yeah, I think writing is an act of discovery. Like I mean, it's not a good, even though you're trying to find your entry point, I never go into the poem knowing what all my movements are going to be, right? And so I definitely entered the space of a poem thinking about it as an act of discovery. Like I want the poem to reveal itself to me. So, even though I have the constraint of reminding the retainer, I start the letter like that. I'm still kind of groping in the darkness and letting the poem's instincts come out to me. And I'm trying to have more of a relationship with uncertainty in my work. And there's a really great essay by Charles Baxter, like Against Epiphany. Like sometimes I really reach for the mic drop ending poems, endings, and I'm trying to actually go against some of my own poetic instincts. And what does it mean to have a softer poem or a quieter poem, or let some of those bird poems come out? It's so funny because when the Atlantic had asked for some poems, I sent her some more louder poems, and I just snuck that bird poem in there last second. I don't know if y'all have done that. You're like, let me just think the one poem that's kind of a different tone. And she picked the bird poem, and I was like, I honestly was never going to even publish that because I was like, this is not really me. But she ended up loving it, and I ended up loving it too. I'm getting off of your question. What was the question? I got lost.
Balancing the unknown with research and facts.
Yeah. So I think like even though I have all that research or have all the facts, like I think think of I think that relationship to uncertainty is really important. And I still think it's that duende mysterious force inside of a poem where the poem, reveals itself to you. I try to leave those room for surprises. And earlier in the workshop, I taught Ross Gay's feet of like, but do you really think I'm talking about my feet? And, I still ask myself those questions at all my fun. Like, am I really talking about Nashville? Am I really talking about Phil Sweetley? Am I really talking about Rihanna? Those questions are getting to these like deeper issues that I'm trying to hover around, right? Yeah. I'm gonna think about that, Prince. I'll find you on Twitter. I'll come up with a better answer. But yeah, relationship to uncertainty. Yeah, I'm still thinking about that.
Yeah, that's a really, really great answer. And my question, I don't really have a segue for it because it's kind of along a different vein, but I was wondering about sort of if you could expand on Patricia's question from earlier about sort of rejecting that critical space and going into what you need to do and writing what you need to write for yourself. I was particularly curious about that as how it's pertaining to the moment we find ourselves in now, and you as a Black woman writer, how does, expectations for what you may be writing or should write or anything like that, how does that balance with what you actually want to write and need to write for yourself, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think for me now that's focusing on poems of joy and pleasure, or finding, like I said, gratitude in the grief, or joy with the pain. And I think when you first start off writing, sometimes, especially money is a reality and a concern. Like maybe I heard Casey Lehman talk about this. Like you maybe have to take a lot of gigs and write about those things in the beginning. But again, with some time and some space and some distance and privilege, like I do have the power to say no now. And that comes with a sense of safety that you don't always get to have when you're starting off earlier in your career. And also, I think I had a sense of recklessness of not taking care of myself earlier on in my writing career that I do have now. Like my mental health is more important than me bloodletting myself for a poem or for book sales or for something. Or I have a different relationship to my work that, yes, I love poetry. I'm so grateful that I get to do this work, but how do I protect myself in the poetry world? That certain things I can protect. And that means maybe I don't answer every question that's asked of me. I advocate for myself with my honorarium. I advocate for myself, if it's not a hell yes, it's a hell no. I say no to people all the time. I hate to do it, but you have to learn that negotiation. And when you start to do that and take care of yourself, and for me, that's happened with like a lot of meditation and movement and journaling, and knowing that like I am not my work and my worth is not found in my work. I love my work, but it is not my worth. And when I start to like unhinge from the empire and just love myself enough, my relationship to my work really changes, and I can make those radical jumps. I can go to the scary places in my work because I create that safety for myself first. Does that make sense? You know what I mean? I provide that sense of safety for myself. I don't like sublet that out to anybody else. So I think that's been a journey, and I'm still figuring out that negotiation. And I see many people in the chat that I've had private conversations with about that. And it is hard because in the poetry business, the writing business, sometimes it's a whisper network about how these things happen with book contracts and books and agents. And if you do want to, you know, move into the prose world, like how does all of that happen? And luckily, like I have so many beautiful, trusted friends to have those conversations with. But it really starts with, sometimes I think when you start off in the poetry world, I remember Gabrielle Cavacresi told me this. They said that you have to be so grateful for everything that you're not allowed to ask for anything. And it's really important to advocate for yourself. So I think that sense of self-advocacy often on the page, asking for what you need often on the page, is what you're seeing in my work and in my life right now. And I think that's how you gain agency.
Tiana, as we kind of get to the end of our time here, I want to ask a question that I hope might be useful for our student writers as they approach the end of the semester and begin to think about final portfolios and wrapping up their creative writing classes. And it's a question about revision and the ways that you make your work new to yourself again as you come back to it, and sort of how you approach the process of revision, especially when you know you're readying a poem to hit the world in some way.
Thanks for this question. Yeah, I think that goes back to the David Baker, there is no hurry. I think I thought everything would be fast, 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 go, 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 now, hurry, hurry, hurry. But again, all this goes back to your question, friends, uncertainty. When you reach that stuck place in a poem, do you have the courage enough and the patience enough to let it ferment in darkness, to put it away? Again, and that's again, I don't flagellate myself at the blinking cursor. Like if I'm struggling in a poem, I'll put that poem away. I'll go for a walk. I'll read. And so I think I see that a lot with students of like, it's not working. Like, what do you do with writer's block? Like, and it's this frustrating. I don't like to, my relationship in art, I don't want it to be full of frustration. Yes, those times happen for sure. But I think for me, it's a pivot and a sign of like, ooh, I need to fill my imagination tank. Let me go read one of my favorite permission-giving poets or authors, or let me go take a long walk. I've had so many poems coming to me just from a walk that I'm having, where I've been stuck on something. I'm always taking notes. So I think my quick and dirty revision tips, a couple of things. Number one, I think those first initial drafts, let your child self come out and play, like be wild, be free, don't self-edit too much, like chase all of the instincts in the poem. If you're feeling that stuckness, put it away. At some point, obviously, you're gonna have to have a different editor person come on. It's mine, I kind of imagine as this like 70s editor, like in the 19th, like an older guy with a cigar that's like, all right, what do we gotta do here? He's stern, he's strict, he comes out, and I make some of those considerations. I also love to record myself, and sometimes I edit off of my breath, or if I hear that stickiness in my ear I can like edit the syntax for that. I throw things in so many different forms. I'll throw it in a couplet, a tercet, I'll do caesura, I'll break it apart, put it back together. And each time you're putting the poem in different containers, the poem starts revealing itself to you. Grammar is being fixed out. Syntax is becoming more supple. You're noticing like, oh, that reflexive pronoun doesn't need to be there. I can take that out, One thing I do in some of my revisions is what is every word I can take out and the poem will still mean the same thing, right? I try to keep all of my drafts, but sometimes you can edit the soul out of everything. You can be like, okay, let me go back a couple of ways and let me see if I lost something. And then always allow for strangeness. I think if you have a really beautiful room, what if you went and knocked off something off the shelf? Not everything has to be so curated and so beautiful. What does it mean to have something messy inside of your work and something that is strange? It doesn't make sense. I think sometimes we have this relationship where everything has to make sense. Like, what's your relationship even to clarity or opacity? And you're allowed that distance. And to me, though, it's every poem reveals what it wants to be. And can you get your ego out of the way to let it reveal itself to you? I'm also trying to change the language we have. It's so violent, like kill your darlings. Like maybe you snuggle your darlings. Maybe you save some of those lines and they end up in another poem. So just be gentle with yourself in the process. I think revision is really where the glorious work happens. And be patient with your work and yourself. The poems will come. Keep reading and keep talking with your friends and just keep loving yourself through the process,
I like that. Let it ferment. Have the courage to let it ferment in the darkness. That's great.
Yeah.
Our final question, which I've prepared Tiana for in advance, is connected to our project in that we are wanting to offer to attendees, to our audience, to our community members, prompts that they can take away and write out of. So Tiana, could you leave us with a prompt tonight?
Absolutely. I'll share my screen. Oh, thank you, Amy, for putting that by Reese. I didn't know that she wrote about that. I'm gonna check that out. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen, leave you all with a little prompt. Most of us should know this poem. Can everyone see my page? So it's Lucille Clifton's "Won't You Come Celebrate With Me." Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model, born in Babylon, both non-white and woman. What did I see to be except myself? I made it up here on this bridge between starshine and clay, my one hand holding tight my other hand. Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. So the writing prompt I leave with you today is, what is something that has tried to kill you and has failed? How can you write a poem that invites and weaves gratitude with the grief, the pain with the pleasure? How did you survive 2020 and what sustains you now? So if that's enough, you can take it from there. But if you want some extra credit, I often think of poems always having the idea of like a rhetorical argument, like a modern sonnet. So even not like, you don't have to write like in strict meter, but thinking about what are those main movements of the psychology of a sonnet, right? That three-part structure. Terrence says a sonnet is a room you can scream into. So what's that opening scream? And then what's that volta, that turn, that veering away, that shift in the rhetorical argument? And then how do you land to that terminal closure, that succinct finale, like that GG ending, right? And so what's interesting is, Lucille Clifton's line, actually 14 lines, and you can actually look at this in the form of a sonnet, like what's that opening celebratory scream? She's like, come celebrate with me, what I've shaped in life. That is an opening celebratory, moment. And then that volta, I think there's kind of two, we could argue this. I think I made it up, right? This act of a statement of improvisation. And then also this like image of survival, her one hand holding the other tight, right? And then that mic drop ending, right? Every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. And so maybe you want to think about answering that with that kind of three-part structure. What has tried to kill you and has failed, and think about that kind of the three moves that the psychology of a sonnet would make. And also looking at Lucille Clifton and thinking about what's your relationship to the line, what's your relationship to grammar. She uses the lowercase I often in her work. And that's a question I've been carrying with me for a long time. What's my relationship to the line? So I leave you with that. And thank you all so much for your time and your attention, your amazing questions, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Tiana. And thank you, Molly and Patricia and Sydney, for joining us and for asking such fantastic questions. Thank you, audience, for all the love you've been showing in the chat. You really responded to that request in a beautiful way. And I will, before I let you all go, I will remind you that you can buy Tiana's books at our bookshop link, which will be in the chat mixed in with all of the praise and thanks. And if you would like to attend future Kenyon Review events, please visit our reading series calendar, which is also going to be linked in the chat. And I want to point you toward information about the Kenyon Review's new Ross event series, which will be running online this summer in correspondence with our Kenyon Review Writers Workshops. The series will include 22 events consisting of conversations and readings from some of the best living writers today, including George Saunders and Daniel Torday. And you can follow the link in your chat to learn more about these events. And finally, if you would like to offer financial support to the KR, you can follow the store link also in our chat to make a donation. Tiana, thank you again. This has been such a wonderful evening. And I'm just so delighted that you accepted our invitation.
Of course. Thank you, Elizabeth, Sydney, Tori, Molly, Patricia. I really appreciate all the questions and curating this beautiful night. And thank you all in the chat so much. I hope you have a lovely evening.
Yes. Have a great evening, everyone.